May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be pleasing to you, O Lord. Hey, I have to start with a confession. The lectionary reading and a brand new congregation who's never met me before that are wrestling with my accent, let alone my beliefs, gave quite a challenge. This was one of the most difficult sermons to birth. So please take only what is useful and discard the rest. The Eucharist and holy gift of love is such a sacred blessing. If you listen to the language sung or said by the minister or priest as communion is offered, we are told that this meal is shared with our ancestors, with the heavenly host of angels and archangels in attendance. Heaven and earth are full of your glory. Hosanna in the highest. Blessed is he, oh blessed is he, who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna in the highest. The sanctity of the bread and wine scribed into that altar there is not something I want to undermine in my sermon today. Communion, the pouring out of the Christ, the Anointed One. Communion is a mystery that cannot be explained. And like so many of you, I take the bread and the wine, and I believe that it aligns the cells of my body with my ancestors and descendants to come. I believe it opens me to all of humanity, not just the Christian body, but all of humanity. And I believe it opens me at my blink of an eye, short lifespan, to the eternal wholeness that I came from and to which I shall return. It's a process of transformation from me and my to us and ours. A transformation also to thou and thy. It is so helpful and transformative to have this ritual, this spiritual practice that places the sacred, unconditional love that is boundless under our skin, into our separate self, into our bodies and our digestive system. And for modern-day non-Christians looking in at this ritual of taking the body and the blood of a tortured, holy human, it's rather gruesome and strange, and they often ask me about it. What is the deal with that weird thing? I'm glad that they know that they can ask me. I think Eucharist is so incredibly helpful because we humans really do see ourselves as separate from everything else. I really am Simon, Scottish, with a funny accent for you, born 48 years ago. I love people, food, animals, and Vivaldi. I know myself as me, but all of this will die when I die. Well, maybe not Vivaldi, and probably not my memories and sense of belonging to people and place. But so much of who I am will die. There's a beautiful poem called How to Be a Good Ancestor by Sophia Rosenberg, and she says, "Be still, listen, slip through the needle eye of silence and leave behind your preference for red wine, your talent for word games, your grandfather's watch, your hair, your skin, your teeth, and enter naked as bones." How to be a good ancestor. So much of this quirky self that I am will die with my body. And within me is far more than just me. And wouldn't it be good if we could access that universal, what I call Christ consciousness, that timeless wisdom. Wouldn't it be good if we could access that before we die? I think that's why we're here. Meanwhile, separation is both real and an illusion. We live in a very interconnected world where financial dealings in Japan, as well as smoke in California and Canada, become our lived experience very quickly. We are interconnected spiritually as well as environmentally, technologically, and economically. But we live separate lives, and it's so easy to get lost and bogged down in the solitary experience. This is where communion is so helpful. The repair, the healing, and the oneing that it brings help me show up to a very difficult world with my full humanity. In the early days of Christianity in Britain, harvest and Eucharist merged, co-joined at this time of year in early August. It's called Lammas, or Loaf-Mass. And it was a very holy day. Maybe it still is for some churches. In Scotland, we celebrate harvest now later in September. But we still make the harvest loaf with the wheat and the corn, and sometimes there's a little mouse. Have you ever seen the harvest loaf? Do you do that here? I know there's a lot of Scottish descendants in this area of Vermont. It's a lovely celebration of the harvest, but it no longer happens on that day in August that marks halfway between the summer solstice and the equinox, the autumn equinox. It's the time when the first wheat fruits, and the time when they would make that communion loaf with the first grain of the year. It was very holy. In an agricultural society, this was the big deal. And it happens to coincide with an earlier pagan festival for the harvest called Lughnasa. It's a Gaelic word. There's an interesting parallel in the pagan Lughnasa myth. It's the time where the crops die in giving themselves in the harvest. There's a story of death and the life-giving resurrection in that old pagan myth. But if we put communion aside and just look at harvest, I believe that it is essential for us supermarket dwellers who have no memory or concept of running out of food. It's very important that we spiritually attend to harvest. Harvest is about responding to the gracious giving of the earth and plants. It holds within it a deep recognition of reciprocity and thanksgiving. Eucharist, that Greek word for communion, means thanksgiving. When we hear the story of the Last Supper, we're told that Jesus said, "This is my life poured out for you." This is my life poured out for you. Now, as a minister, I've been extremely blessed to be involved in the death process of a few people, companion them as they approached death, sat with them when they died, and helped families with the burial and the memorial. Actually, when I was at seminary in New York City, one of my classmates was psychic, right? And she told me that the moment of death is highly, highly holy. But I am not, my world isn't a psychic world. So I didn't really take that in. And I was extremely surprised when I got into working with death, when I felt that holy, holy presence, that incredible blessing and outpouring. I was really shocked because I was actually quite frightened of death. I didn't expect death work to feel so holy. I mean, what's holy about washing a dead body? Oh my God, that is one of the most profound things a human can do. Everything suddenly becomes bigger. Perspective is given. Do not waste your life on things that do not matter. I have a suspicion that when we die, the love that we hold for others is poured out on them as a blessing. Now, even if I've just made this idea up, I love that. I find it very reassuring to think that the love that I hold for place and people is poured out, blesses it, before I step into whatever happens next. It was brilliant and powerful that Jesus took the bread and the wine, the everyday elements of a meal, and used this to illustrate that his life can become our life, that his love and wanting with God would not die when he died. Because as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be. Amen. But we need to get that idea into our bodies, into our separate selves. That love is greater than death, and love transcends time. And he chose a beautiful ritual in the form of food, life, food, in the moment of death and his imminent murder. Now, I never hear Christians talking about communion as a symbol of our place in the cycle of life and death. Communion as a sense of interbelonging with all life on this good earth. But we talk about that, the bread of the earth and the wine, grapes, fruit of the vine. We talk about that in the words. What we tend to do is make communion all about Jesus and our own personal salvation. Now, this is right and true. It's right and true. But today I want to expand that a little to include a sense of belonging to this good earth through some ancient Celtic wisdom. Loaf-Mass, Lammas, as it's called today, Lammas, was a Christian holiday celebrated on August 1st in Britain. Shakespeare mentions Lammas in Romeo and Juliet. I didn't know that until last night. I was quite chuffed when I found that out. He says, it is observed of Juliet, come Lammas Eve at night, she will be 14. The purpose of this holy day was to honor and bless the first fruits of the harvest. And a loaf baked of flour from the newly harvested corn would be brought into the church and blessed in this very special communion. And I am absolutely sure that nobody ate the grain until that happened. Great. It was. It helped me gather my thoughts. It was very helpful. So Lughnasa is the older pagan time. So the pagan holidays of the year, there's 8 of them. You know many of them. Halloween is the start of the Celtic year. It starts with the place of death, and then you go into winter solstice. And then Imbolc, which is the time when the lambs come into milk, the promise of a new year. Then Equinox. Then Beltane, the greening, 1st of May, Midsummer, and then the first harvest festival on August 1st. We are in the season of Lughnasa. The festival itself is named after a god, a Celtic god called Lu. And back in the day, there would be huge gatherings up on mountaintops, religious ceremonies and ritual athletic games, fasting, hand fasting. Couples could marry for a year or renew their commitment. And the purpose of this celebration was actually a funeral festival, because Lu's mother was a land goddess, and she had died clearing the plains so that the crops could come. I don't know how to pronounce her name. Tailtiu, Tailtiu. She represented the dying vegetation that was given to be our food. One of my favorite Monday teachers is Robin Wall Kimmerer. Did anybody here know that name? She's an Indigenous woman from upstate New York. She's a Potawatomi citizen. She's also a scientist and a wonderful author. She wrote Braiding Sweetgrass and Gathering Moss. And she helps us learn why it was so obvious to the early Christians to put harvest and Eucharist together. And I've got a little bit of audio from Robin Wall Kimmerer. I hope you can hear this. It wasn't my phone earlier, but it could have been.
If I could choose just a single element of the traditional teachings that we're called to pick up, it would be the teachings of the honorable harvest, which were taught us by the plants, who give us everything that we need. It's a covenant of reciprocity between humans and the living world, a very sophisticated ethical protocol. One of the first steps of the honorable harvest is to understand that the lives that we are taking are the lives of generous beings, of sovereign beings. And in order to accept their gift, we owe them at least our attention. To care for them, we must know what they need. And at the very minimum, we should know their names. And yet, the average American can name over 100 corporate logos and 10 plants. Is it a surprise that we have accepted a political system that grants personhood to corporations and no status at all for wild rice and redwoods? Every breath that you take is a breath that was made for you by plants. And the water that you drink, whether you're in an urban setting, whether you're on a remote mountaintop, we still are recipients of those gifts. And if we take the time to be grateful, that brings us into that state of humility, of understanding that we are not at the top of a biological hierarchy, that in fact we are the younger brothers of creation.
I love that turning on the head, that we are the young brothers and sisters, the new kids on the block on Mother Earth. I bring this in because Jesus used the symbol of bread, wheat from the fields, and wine, fruit from the vine, for a very good reason. Symbols of life given to us on multiple levels. Harvest is a celebration of the eternal promise of life poured out into this world so abundantly that the crops from the harvest will last through the many, many months of a Vermont winter. And for me, this reveals the unconditional, sustaining goodness of God. Now, I understand God as a pouring out of life force, pouring out of life into all that exists, the people, the rocks, the rivers, as well as the natural laws like gravity that hold everything together. In Scotland, when you look at the old manuscripts like the Book of Kells, or you read the old prayers of the people, Christ is interwoven with the landscape and creatures. Christ is among us. Christ, which means the anointed one and is not Jesus' surname, lived among us. Emmanuel. God loves us and dwells among us. Something that Celtic Christianity is very strong on is there's no separation between matter and spirit. This was a later teaching that came out of the Roman Church that separated spirit from physical matter. And it's really, really important, especially in this environmental age, that we move beyond seeing spirit as good and matter or the flesh as weak. Because we've made the trees, rivers, rocks, sometimes even people, into resources. We've de-animated and disenchanted the natural world. This is a huge mistake. Consciously participating in nature's harvest honors the source that we come from. the source that constantly sustains and nurtures us without our asking. And for me, harvest, taking the blueberries off my bush and eating them in the morning, I didn't do that this morning because I had to get up early to come here. But that's such an everyday way of creating communion, not just with the people, but with the land and all the creatures that also live off the land. And for a moment, the hustle and bustle of modern life ceases, and I am held in the promise of goodness, the grace of Mother Nature distilled into a juicy berry. When I take in how much I am given, I am awestruck. Meister Eckhart, that German mystic from hundreds of years ago, said, if the only prayer you ever said in your entire life was thank you, then that would be enough. Can we bring the gratitude of the harvest, the recognition of all that we have been given, into communion? Can we shift from taking the world into us? Can we shift to giving and responding with the heart? Shifting from me and my to us and ours. And we may not recognize it because life can be so incredibly painful and difficult. But we are given an abundance of love, creativity, beauty, and opportunity for change. We are abundantly blessed. Let me sing about this. This is Psalm 46. You probably picked up on that. I love the Psalms. And this is a modern setting by a woman called Christine Robinson that I put into song. God is our refuge and our strength, a haven in times of trouble. Therefore we can be calm though the earth shakes, though the nations change and though the sea rises. Our trust is in the Holy One, who is making the heavens and the earth, who is with us in the midst of the city and in our own hearts. See the miracles that are part of our lives and the longing for justice and peace in our hearts, and the way we can make our lives abundant in nearly any circumstance. God whispers to us, be still and know that I am God, and I am with you to the ends of the universe and through all time. In summary, I think God's abundant love and expansive pouring out is something that Jesus steers us to over and over again in his teachings. From the laborers in the vineyard who only work for an hour but get a full day's wage, to the welcome home embrace of the prodigal son who had squandered the family's inheritance but is treated like a prince. This is such a bigger way of seeing the world, and a justice that is expansive and compassionate. Justice, love, forgiveness is to be poured out abundantly and freely shared, because we come alive by pouring out. And here's the metaphor again of the harvest giving itself away. And I'd like to close with a reading from this book. This is John O'Donoghue, that late Irish poet. It's called To Bless the Space Between Us. And this is an excerpt from a poem called The Inner History of a Day. we seldom notice how each day is a holy place, where the Eucharist of the ordinary happens, transforming our broken fragments into an eternal continuity that keeps us. Somewhere in us a dignity presides that is more gracious than the smallness that fuels us to fear and force. A dignity that trusts the form a day takes. So at the end of this day, we give thanks for being betrothed to the unknown and for the secret work through which the mind of the day and the wisdom of the soul become one. Thank you for listening.